One subject I get asked about all the time is modes and how you practice them, how you even start to think about modes. Do you start with a key signature? Do you start with a major scale? Do you think about a minor scale? Do you think about different degrees of the scale and flatten or sharpen certain parts of that scale? I'm going to talk to you very briefly today about what we can do with a major scale, a plain and simple major scale, a scale that we all usually start with learning when we first start thinking about scales. A scale that's very recognizable to our ears. We very often hear a wrong note in a major scale because we're so used to hearing it, but we're not often used to hearing the wrong notes in a certain mode. For example, the mixolydian mode. Would you know what a mixolydian mode sounds like? Would you be able to sing a mixolydian mode? I'm going to talk to you about a few things that we can do with a very, very simple major scale today to make modes easier to get your head around. So as I said, I'm going to keep it as simple as possible. What more simple way to start than a C major scale? No alterations to this scale, it's just C to C, no sharps or flats. First of all, let's have a listen to it. A very recognizable scale. We're going to hear if there are any incorrect notes in there. This is our C major scale. Now, it's very important that we think about numbering a scale. You'll have heard me go on about this quite a lot in the past. I'm a very big believer in thinking that if you number a scale, it's going to make things a lot easier, particularly when you're making some adjustments to that scale. We can talk in numbers then instead of specific notes. Because remember, we can apply these rules that I'm going to talk about today to any major scale. If we understand what number of our major scale we're playing, then we know which note we can adjust to make these changes. Now let's look at this numbered C major scale. If we flatten the 7th degree of that scale, so the 7th note of that scale, in this C major example, it's the B. So we've currently got a B natural. If we lower that 7th note by just one semitone, we get a B flat. Now that instantly changes this C major scale into a dominant scale. Notice how we've not had to think about key signature. We're not thinking, well, if it's a dominant scale on C, then we need to be thinking in F major. None of that. We're thinking from a C major scale, we are flattening the 7th degree of that scale, and we have our dominant scale. This dominant scale is also known as the mixolydian mode. Now, I'm not going to go into any detail about why it's called the mixolydian mode, but that should just be a framework or a rule that we think about when we want to play a mixolydian scale. If you want to play a mixolydian scale on any note, you want to be thinking about that major scale, but flatten the 7th note. That's all you need to think about. Major scale, flatten the 7th. That is a dominant scale or a mixolydian scale on that note. Notice how I'm saying on that note. We're not in any specific key. We're not thinking about key signatures. We are thinking about that note we are starting on. C major can be moved into C mixolydian or C dominant scale by flattening that 7th note. Notice how the numbers come in. Flattened 7th, dominant scale, mixolydian scale. Now let's have a listen to what that mixolydian scale sounds like. If we play this scale next to that major scale, it's going to sound quite different. It's going to sound quite odd to our ears because we are used to that 7th degree not being flattened. We're used to that major 7th sounding in the major scale. We have that flattened 7th now, which is going to make it sound quite different. But it's important that we get used to that sound. If we want to get into modes, we need to get used to the sound of this mixolydian mode. The best way I can say that you do it is you get your major scale, you flatten the 7th degree, and that is going to be the sound of that mixolydian. The second mode I want to talk to you about today is the dorian mode. Now, we're going to start with that C major scale again. We're not going to start thinking about key. We're not going to start thinking about this minor sound. We are going to start with our major scale. Again, our numbered major scale is a good place to start because we are going to alter 2 notes this time. The way we get the sound of this dorian mode is by flattening the 3rd and the 7th degree of a major scale. So again, you can see that we've got our major scale, numbered major scale, we flattened the 3rd, flattened the 7th, that is our dorian scale. Again, this can be applied to any major scale. That's why I said at the very start of this video that you start with your major scale and you alter that major scale. If we think of these rules, then we can apply them to any major scale. The reason why I brought up these two modes to start with is they are the most popular modes that you will see in jazz. The mixolydian mode is used for the dominant chord. So if you see a C7 chord, then you are going to use this dominant scale. You're going to use this mixolydian mode. The way that you get there is you see the letter that's there, the C, and you alter that major scale by flattening the 7th, and that is your dominant scale. The Dorian mode is the minor 7 chord, or the minor 7 scale. So if you see C minor 7 chord symbol in your music, you are going to play that C major scale but with a flattened 3rd and a flattened 7th. Notice how I'm not having to think about what key I'm playing in. I'm not having to think about, oh, well, if that's that degree of the scale, then I need to think about which mode that is, which means I need to be thinking about a specific other major scale key. Forget about all of that. Think of your major scale, flatten the 3rd, flatten the 7th. That's your Dorian scale, or the scale that's used over a minor 7 chord in jazz. The final thing I just want to mention is get the sound of these scales in your ears. It's really important you get used to the sound of these scales and notice that they are definitely different than the major scale. You can work from the major scale, but notice the difference in sound. Now, as I said, they will feel and sound quite odd to our ears to start with until we get used to them. As I've said through this video, the best place to start is that major scale. Alter the major scale so you can get used to what this difference in sound is with these two modes that I've just mentioned today.